Chapter 14. "I can't," said Holly in a near panic. "I just can't." She was sitting in the infirmary talking to Madame Pomfrey. Sasha was on her lap purring contentedly. Madame Pomfrey had waited until detention ended, and then waited 2 more weeks to make sure Holly was fully rested before describing what Holly had to do to learn how to block emotions. "You have to," she assured Holly. "It's the only way." "Can't she just wait outside behind the classroom?" "You know I don't feel her that far," persisted Holly. "I told you what happened over the holidays. I just can't bear to be without her." "It's got to be all the way," insisted Madame Pomfrey gently. "You know as well as I do that if Sasha is anywhere nearby and something happens, you'll reach out to her and she'll come running. You won't learn to block. You'll just strengthen your connection to Sasha." Unfortunately, this was probably true. Ever since Sasha's return from the Catman, Holly could sense Sasha's presence wherever she was in the parents' house. Holly knew instantly whenever Sasha needed food to go out, and Sasha had always known when she was needed or it was safe to show herself. "It's just like at the beginning of the school year," explained Madame Pomfrey further. "You couldn't learn to sense different emotions and identify sources while you were still taking the purple potion, and you won't learn to block while Sasha is around." But, sobbed Holly, stroking Sasha, "to leave Sasha up in the dorms all day? However will I manage?" "You'll do just fine," assured Madame Pomfrey. "You're ready for this. Just think of the warm feelings that always surrounded you with Sasha and make them for yourself. You don't have to build a cocoon. Just aim those warm feelings in the direction of the emotion or pain you wish to block. It's like an invisible shield that you only use when necessary." Madame Pomfrey patted Holly on the back. "You can do this," she said reassuringly. "You just have to try. It will take lots of practice, though, just like before. Pick a student in the class and try to block his or her emotions. When you get one blocked, then you can try for another, and then more. You probably won't have to block much physical pain from injuries, of course, but I'm not sure I would recommend you watch the next Quidditch match." "Are you okay?" asked Becky when Holly left the infirmary. She could tell Holly had been crying. "Not really," answered Holly, rubbing her eyes and holding Sasha tightly against her. She explained the next step in learning how to block. "I don't think I can make it away from Sasha like that," continued Holly. "When Sasha was gone from my house, I was so scared I wanted to curl up in a hole and die." "Don't worry," whispered Becky reassuringly. "We'll help you. It'll be okay." But her words didn't make Holly feel any better. She was terrified. She didn't know how she would make it through the next day without Sasha. When they got back up to the dorms, Becky called a quick house meeting and explained Holly's situation. Everyone agreed to help. The problem was, no one knew quite how to help. Holly's next day turned into her worst nightmare. First, she had to leave Sasha in the dorms when it was time to go to breakfast. Sasha wouldn't be alone. The other cats stayed in the dorms too. But Sasha looked so piteous when Holly told her she had to stay. It was heartrending. With Mark and Becky by her side, Holly cautiously ventured outside. Every step took her further away from Sasha. Every step made her feel more and more jittery. The 3 left early so there would be fewer students at breakfast. Even so, the combined emotions of the students hit her like a strong blast of cold air. Holly sat at the furthest end of the table. "You can do this," she kept on telling herself. "You've done this all your life. It's just like before." But it wasn't. The emotions at Hogwarts were much stronger than the Muggle ones at her last school. Even with the rest of the students at the other end of the hall, Holly was acutely aware of their presence. She managed to ignore them while she ate. Midway through her meal, though, Holly suddenly felt ravenously hungry and piled more food on her plate. "Kippers and peanut butter?" asked Mark. Holly stopped eating and looked at the food on her fork. That did sound disgusting, but here she was trying to eat it. She looked up. Several students had just walked in. Holly wasn't ravenously hungry. One of them was. And someone in that group had a liking for kippers and peanut butter. Even knowing it was someone else's emotions didn't stop Holly from acting on it. Holly fled the great halls. No wonder she'd always had an erratic appetite while at school in previous years, alternating between stuffing and starving herself. Becky found Holly curled up on her bed with Sasha. "It'll be okay," said Becky reassuringly, trying to convince Holly to attend class. "Nobody will be hungry in class. You won't have the urge to eat weird food. There'll be less students." The words sounded good, but Holly knew Becky was just as worried as she was about class. "Come on," Becky urged. "You won't know for sure until you try." Reluctantly, Holly allowed Becky to walk her to class. Professor Lovegood said nothing about the absent cat. She started her lesson in her usual serene fashion. With everyone focused on taking notes, Holly found she could take notes too. Then came the spell practice. Students were working on Protégé, the shield spell. The familiar knights now held swords that sent out sparks. Each student selected a knight. As a group, they held their wands ready, and on the count of 3, shouted Protégé. Some of the students succeeded in casting a proper spell. Others got stung by the sparks. Holly immediately felt as if she'd been hit by numerous sparks. They didn't hurt much. Each spark felt not much more than a tiny pinprick. Several together hurt more. She had managed to create a shield, but still she felt sparks. Holly's shield couldn't stop her from feeling the failure of other students. Professor Lovegood moved up and down the rows, correcting gestures and accents. Again and again she counted to 3, and the students cast their spell. Every time, Holly felt the sting of sparks. Finally, Professor Lovegood said it was time for independent practice. The knights were set to shoot off sparks at random times, and each student was to cast his or her spell independently. Holly faced off with her knight. "Protégé!" she shouted, before the knight had finished lifting its wand to give out its sparks. Holly's shield held, until Becky, nearby, blew her own spell and got zapped. Then Holly felt the sparks as they hit Becky. Distracted, she let her own shield down, only to be hit by actual stream of sparks from her knight. Holly tried again. "Protégé!" she shouted. This time, her words came out exactly at the same time as Susan Braesbury. Susan had been ready to cast the spell. Holly had not. Yet she had shouted it anyway. Holly's spell fizzled in the air uselessly. She got again zapped. "Protégé!" Over and over, Holly heard that word, to be followed by stings and pain and or elation at success. She hurt, felt frustrated and elated all at the same time. Holly could no longer focus on casting her own spell. She could barely control her own actions. Stumblingly, she ran from the room crying. Holly curled up in the corner of the girls' bathroom and continued crying. It was the nearest place of solitude, deserted, as usual. Moaning Myrtle came out of the toilet to investigate, but Holly was too busy crying to notice. Ghosts didn't bother her as much as living people. Finally, her tears ran dry and she became calmer. Gradually, Holly became aware that someone was in the room with her. She opened her eyes and looked. Professor Lovegood had squatted silently on the floor next to her. How did she do that? Holly could easily sense the emotional presence of students from across the room. Professor Lovegood had an emotional presence too, but it was more like a soft whisper, heard only on a quiet, still summer day. Harry Potter was like that too, quiet, even with his emotions. Holly sat up. "Professor Lovegood," she babbled apologetically. "I'm sorry I ran out. I couldn't do it. There was just too many people in the room. Madame Pomfrey said to pick one person and block those emotions, but I don't know how to do that. Even if I did, what good would it do? What about all the other students in the room? I just can't make it without Sasha." Holly burst out into tears again. Professor Lovegood waited patiently until the sobbing stopped. Then she produced a damp handkerchief and proceeded to wipe Holly's face. As she wiped, she spoke. "The other girl with the cat," she began softly, almost to herself. She hummed a lot. I suppose it helped. Professor Lovegood helped Holly to her feet. "Your friends are waiting for you outside," she said gently while walking Holly to the bathroom doors. "Transfigurations won't be nearly as difficult." Mark and Becky greeted Holly when she stepped outside the bathroom doors. Becky had all of Holly's things. The 3 of them hurried off to the next class. "Are you okay?" asked Becky, worried. Holly nodded. "What did the professor say?" "She said to hum." replied Holly thoughtfully. Hum what? I don't know. A song, I guess. That shouldn't be too hard, said Mark. After all, you're in choir. So Holly thought of a song she knew from choir and started to hum it. Recognizing the tune, Becky joined in. Music always made Holly feel better, and it did so now. But would it help her during class? Again, not a word was spoken when the three slipped into class late. Holly was glad Professor Iverson was her Transfiguration teacher. She was also head of the Hufflepuff house. She seemed to know that they would not have been late without a good reason, and didn't take up class time making embarrassing inquiries. That did not stop Professor Iverson from expecting them to keep up with their classwork. Susan Braesbury hastily whispered the day's lesson, and soon they were all attempting the latest spell, reparo. In front of each student was a small pile of broken shards of pottery. It was their job to return the pile to its original shape. Holly didn't have much success with the spell. She was too busy humming. It did seem to help. Humming helped her ignore the other students while they cast their spells. Student elation at success seemed to offset their disappointments at failure. And when Holly did try to cast the spell, at least it was not in sync with any spell cast by another student. Albus hurried up to Holly after class while she was collecting her things. "Are you okay?" he asked worriedly. "You look awful. Did the Slytherins do something again? They wouldn't tell us," he said, meaning the rest of the Hufflepuffs. Holly shook her head. "No," she replied briefly. "It's not the Slytherins." She didn't feel up to explaining further. Rose came up behind them. "Where's Sasha?" she asked Holly. "Is she okay?" "Sasha's fine," said Holly. "She's in the dorms." Then Holly added, "I'm not allowed to bring her to class anymore." "Oh, no," whispered Rose in horror, realizing the full impact of what was meant. "That's awful. Is there anything we can do to help?" "Not much," sighed Holly, lifting her bag. "I've just got to learn to deal with it. Right now, the only thing that seems to help is to hum." "Well," said Rose sympathetically, "if we can help, let us know. Good luck." She and Albus hurried off to join the rest of the Gryffindors. Holly spent her lunchtime in the dorms holding Sasha. Exhausted by the morning's activities, she lay on her bed, cradling Sasha in her arms, and took a long nap. Becky woke her for dinner. The two went down to the great hall after most everybody else had finished eating. Having missed lunch, Holly was very hungry, until she entered the great hall. Then she felt extremely full. She realized the fullness was the feeling of the other students leaving the hall, not her. So she forced herself to eat while trying to hum, knowing that if she didn't, she would feel starved again once she left the great hall. Holly found it disturbing to note that the Slytherin students who passed by did not regard her with their usual disdain. Instead, they seemed to regard her with curiosity. That did not bode well for the future. After dinner, Holly reported to Madame Pomfrey. "It was perfectly horrid," complained Holly to Madame Pomfrey while reporting her experiences of the day. "At breakfast, I couldn't stop myself from eating, and I knew I wasn't even hungry. No wonder the doctors used to accuse me of being bulimic. I remember there were times at school I would stuff myself so full of food I could barely move. Afterwards, I would always wonder why I did it. And then, during the Defense Against the Dark Arts class," continued Holly in a rush, "it was like everyone was shouting at me at once, only it was all in my head and I couldn't escape it. There was no way I could conjure up warm feelings of Sasha with that going on. And the Protégé spell? It's supposed to be a shield spell. It was positively useless. It didn't do a thing against all the other needle pricks that I kept on feeling, which came from the students who couldn't get their spells right. You told me to pick one student's emotions and try to block it. That may work with 2 or 3 students present in the first place, but it doesn't work in a classroom when everyone else is also bombarding me with their emotions." Holly took a deep breath and added, "Professor Lovegood suggested I hum. It does seem to help, but I can't really hum and eat at the same time. And what if the teachers tell me I can't hum during class?" Madame Pomfrey listened until Holly ran out of words. Then she spoke. "I don't think it's the humming as much as it is focusing on something to the exclusion of all else. It can easily be a prayer, a chant, or a thought, but music is much easier to wholly embrace. Unfortunately, it does not actually block outside emotions. It just puts them in the background. While humming may help you get through the day, you'll still have to learn to block. So what do I do? Trying to think about Sasha didn't work. How else am I supposed to block? Madame Pomfrey thought a while. To tell you the truth, she said, not much is known about the mechanics of blocking that empaths use. There are so few of them, and they don't advertise their abilities. What about this girl that attended Hogwarts before that Professor Lovegood mentioned? Said Holly desperately. Could we maybe ask her? Her situation was a bit different from yours, acknowledged Madame Pomfrey. She came from a wizard family and didn't experience the same kind of problems as you. But I could look into contacting her and seeing what she says. Would you? Exclaimed Holly. That would really help. In the meantime, continued Madame Pomfrey, you keep Sasha in the dorms and continue humming, if that helps. But keep trying to block. Most likely, as you get used to all the outside emotions, you'll find your own way to block. Holly left the infirmary feeling a bit more hopeful, but not much. She and Becky made their way back to the dorms. While there, Holly copied all of Mark's notes on the day's classes. She hadn't managed to write anything that approached legible, and had even less idea of what the professors had actually said. In the peace of the dorms, with Sasha on her shoulder, she could make better sense of the lecture material and started on the written homework. At midnight, the first-year Hufflepuffs trooped out for class with Professor Ferenz. The students sat out under the stars, snuggled under blankets, and watched for comets. Sitting apart from the other students, Holly felt herself relax for the first time since she had gone without Sasha. Humming softly, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine Sasha next to her purring happily. For the faintest instant, all the outside emotions seemed to fade into nothingness. But then Susan coughed, and Mark shouted excitedly, "Hey, I see one!" And the moment was lost. Outside emotions rushed in, vying for space with their own feelings, and Holly again focused on her humming. The next day went much better than Holly expected. Humming and potions worked out quite well. It kept Holly focused on task, and her anti-fungus potion turned out perfectly, much to the delight of Professor Slughorn. 3 points for Hufflepuff. In charms, the class was learning Alohomora. The students had a locked box and placed in front of their desk, which they then had to unlock. Once opened, the box contained a second, nested box, also locked. Humming again helped Holly ignore the other students, and she managed eventually to open the first 2 locked boxes. Mark got all the way to the 5th nested locked box. 5 points for Hufflepuff. Their Slytherin classmates, instead of being annoyed, merely broadcast curiosity. Holly had no doubt about what or whom they were curious. Holly ate lunch after most of the students had left the Great Hall. It was easier to force herself to eat when non-hungry students passed by than to try to stop from ravenously stuffing herself, as she had had to do the previous day. Professor Longbottom had the students potting and tending plants in the newly repaired greenhouse. Humming was no hindrance to class instruction. In fact, Becky heard Holly and joined in humming too. Then the other students took up the song, and soon the whole class cheerfully kept time with the music. Class ended all too soon for Holly. Professor Binns droned on as usual, putting all the students to sleep. He didn't care if a student hummed. Humming kept Holly awake, but she couldn't really hear what he had said. No matter, she never could understand Professor Binns well enough to take decent notes. Fortunately, Mark still took great notes, and going over his notes with him in the evening helped both of them study. Holly dreaded the thought of attending Defense Against the Dark Arts class again. She doubted she could manage wand work even with humming. Fortunately for her, Professor Lovegood pulled Holly aside as the rest of the students entered the practice room. "You seem to be spending a lot of time in the girls' bathroom," she began. "It doesn't look very good right now. I think you need to put your skills to use making it look better. Reparo should do nicely for today. I shall expect you to practice Protégé on your own time this afternoon. Understand?" Holly nodded gratefully. She grabbed her things and headed for the bathroom. "Thank you, Professor Lovegood," she shouted as she left the room. Moaning Myrtle got very excited when she learned the reason for Holly's presence in the bathroom. "No one has ever taken time to clean this bathroom before," she said eagerly. She even offered to flood the toilet so there would be enough water to clean the floors and such. "Not today," Holly told Myrtle. "I'm supposed to use Reparo, and I've only just learned it. I'm not very good at it yet. and indeed it took several attempts to get anything to move back into place, let alone seamlessly mend itself. Holly started with the mirrors. Myrtle helped her find the scattered shards. If they were too far apart from each other, they wouldn't react to the spell. With Myrtle offering all sorts of advice on how to hold the wand and what to say, Holly eventually succeeded in repairing the mirrors. Then she went to work on the broken tiles. There were a lot of broken tiles. Holly had finished about half of the tiles when Becky came in and told her that it was time to go to Transfiguration. The two assured Myrtle that Holly would probably be back the next week to work more on the bathroom some more. Gradually, Holly got used to life without Sasha by her side. By eating late, avoiding large crowds and other students whenever possible, and steadily humming, she managed to get through each day. Over the weekend, she stayed pretty much in the dorms, keeping Sasha company. Meanwhile, Mark looked up some cleaning and repairing spells and had Holly practice them. When Professor Lovegood asked her to return to the bathroom the next week, Holly was ready to finish the job. With Myrtle's excited input and floor flooding, the bathroom slowly transformed from a filthy, broken, depressing place to one that sparkled and gleamed. One day, Holly was just about ready to leave for her next class when the door opened. Martina Goyle and her Slytherin friend Shirley Ogg walked in. The two always traveled together. Martina was fairly heavy, while Shirley was tall and thin. Together the two reminded Holly of a hippo and a giraffe on the prowl. "So this is where you've been hiding out during Defense Against the Dark Arts," Martina said appraisingly. As usual, Martina's short brown hair was tied into two stubby braids, and she seemed to clunk in those heavy shoes of hers, while her thick body pushed its way around the bathroom, forcing Holly to step aside as she moved. She inspected the interior of some bathroom stalls. "I can't imagine why there would be an out of order sign outside." "It looks very nice in here," added Shirley, noting the sparkling fixtures and white walls. "You'd never believe what this place looked like a couple weeks ago when I peeked in. It was positively disgusting. Who knew a Hufflepuff could clean as well as a house elf? I must remember that, if my house elf gets tired." "Come on, Martina," added Shirley with a toss of her short, curly blonde hair. "We've got to get to class." As the two girls turned to leave, a jar balanced on top of Martina's books slid off and fell with a resounding crash. Its contents splashed all over the floor. "Oops," said Martina. "Sorry about that," looking and feeling not the least bit sorry about the mess she had just created. "No problem," said Shirley blithely. She pointed her wand at the splintered glass and shouted, "Reparo!" The shattered pieces of glass immediately reformed into the original bottle. "Oh dear," said Shirley in a voice that oozed false concern, noting the original contents of the bottle remained scattered on the floor, hissing, spitting, and sizzling. "I guess we shall have to go back and get some more lizard spit for Professor Slughorn. Good thing I've still got this specially enchanted jar to hold it." "And it's fortunate you are so good at cleaning bathrooms," added Martina nastily. "I'm sure you'll have this taken care of in no time." The two girls laughed and opened the bathroom door to leave. Holly, shaking with anger, helplessly watched them leave. She didn't know what to do. Suddenly a flushing sound came from one of the stalls, and moaning Myrtle swooped out of the toilet. She flew through Martina, making her jump, and parked herself in the threshold of the bathroom entrance door facing them. "How dare you mess up my bathroom!" she shouted, making them both back up. "I've been waiting 80 years to have this place fixed up, and you ruin it on the very day it gets finished. You two are nothing but bullies. Mean, nasty bullies," Myrtle continued in a rage. "I don't like bullies. I'll remember you," she screeched, making the two girls back up further. "You'll be sorry." Myrtle swooped through Shirley and back into the toilet with a splash. The toilet then flushed loudly, announcing her departure. Both Slytherin girls quickly fled the bathroom, leaving Holly to assess the damage. Holly was close to tears. She, of all persons, knew how difficult, if not impossible, it would be to repair the damage made by lizard spit. "What happened?" asked Mark. He and Becky had seen the Slytherin girls leave in a hurry and knew something was up. They'd rushed into the bathroom as quickly as possible to check on Holly. Holly numbly pointed to the spreading damage of the lizard spit. Isn't there some way we can stop or neutralize it? Asked Becky, recognizing the spit effect from numerous visits to Hagrid's. Holly shook her head. Not that I know of, she reflected sadly. Do you know of anything? Both Mark and Becky shook their heads. Why don't we rinse off what we can down the drain and wait and see what it looks like when it dries, said Mark. We can check on it after lunch. So the three splashed water on the spit and urged the bubbling liquid down the nearest drain. Where is Myrtle when you need her? Thought Holly grimly as they worked. A flooded bathroom would have helped. They were late to Transfigurations again. This time no one else knew the cause of their absence. Professor Iverson raised her eyebrows at the three. I expect to see the three of you after class today, was all she said, and continued on with her lesson. After class, Professor Iverson assigned each a foot-long report on the difference between transforming inanimate objects to animate objects and transforming animate objects to inanimate objects. Their absence hadn't been totally unavoidable. Mark, Becky, and Holly surveyed the damage done to the bathroom with dismay. Despite their best efforts, several pieces of tile had totally dissolved. Others were so damaged that they would have to be replaced. There was a big gaping hole in one of the mirrors where the spit had splashed up. It's not like you're being ordered to repair this, said Mark thoughtfully. It's the Slytherins that should take care of it. Yeah, like they'd do it, said Becky scornfully. But Myrtle was so happy when I did it. I hate to see it like this, said Holly sorrowfully. Mark sighed. Oh, well, he said. Best get on with it. He took out his wand and pointed it at the damaged tile. Defendo, he said. Holly bent down and pried the loosened tile up off the floor. An hour later they'd removed all the damaged tiles. Becky counted the empty spaces. 13 tiles, she announced. Got any ideas where we might find some more tiles? Both Holly and Mark shook their heads. We'll have to ask around, I guess, said Mark finally. I know where there are some tiles, said a voice behind them. Moaning Myrtle had returned and was watching their efforts. And a mirror, too, she added. Of course, it's broken right now, but I'm sure you could bring all the pieces here and then repair it. Where might that be? Asked Holly. But Myrtle, easily distracted, was staring intently at Mark. A boy in the girls' bathroom, she said interestedly. Ooh, I haven't had one of them in ages. Not since Harry. What's your name? Mark stared back at Myrtle. Mark, he said. You were saying something about tiles? He asked, reminding Myrtle of their original problem. Well, there's a whole stack of them all loosened up in the Slytherin girls' bathroom. How did that happen? Inquired Becky curiously. I got a little angry this morning, confessed Myrtle. I didn't know you could lift tiles, commented Mark, impressed. I can't, admitted Myrtle. But when Peeves heard what had happened, he decided to help out. I stopped up all the toilets and made them flood. Then Peeves had a grand time with the rest of the bathroom. Nobody can tear up things like Peeves, she concluded proudly. It's an interesting idea, Myrtle, said Holly, but we're Hufflepuffs. We can't enter the Slytherin bathroom. I don't even know where it is. That's no problem, said Myrtle eagerly. I'll show you. But what about the password? Asked Becky. Isn't their dorm protected from outside entry? Of course, said Myrtle, but it doesn't stop people inside from coming out. I'll get Peeves to open the door from the inside. But someone is bound to see us. We'll get caught, worried Becky. Not if you do it now, assured Myrtle. Dinner time is just starting, and everybody is out eating. I checked. The three friends looked at each other. This is crazy, said Mark finally. It feels a lot like breaking and entering, theft, and a whole bunch of other things I don't even want to think about. It also feels like justice, responded Holly firmly. You were the ones who said the Slytherins should take care of this mess. I don't think there's any other way they'll help. She looked back at Myrtle. Do you really think we can do it? And not get caught? Added Becky hopefully. Myrtle didn't answer. She just drifted overhead, waiting expectantly. Holly swiftly made up her mind. Well, I'm going to give it a try, she said to Myrtle. Show me the way. I'll meet you in the dungeon, Myrtle said cheerfully, and with a swoop disappeared down a toilet. and it flushed noisily. Holly raced out of the bathroom and started quickly down the halls. "You must be out of your mind," complained Mark as he hurried to catch up with Holly. "It's just a ghost in an out-of-order bathroom. It's not worth the risk getting in trouble." Holly wheeled around and looked at Mark and then Becky, who had caught up. "You don't have to come with me," she began, "but doing the bathroom was more than a classroom assignment for me. I made a commitment to fix it, and I intend to keep it if possible. If I don't succeed, so be it, but it won't be for lack of trying." Then she turned and continued down the hallway. Grumbling, Mark and Becky hurried to keep up with her. "Must be that Potter blood in her," muttered Mark as they strode along. Surprisingly, they didn't meet anyone on their trip down to the dungeons. Walking down that cold, dank hall, they all wondered, where next? Suddenly a blank section of wall opened up, and Peeves, the poltergeist, floated gracefully out of a hidden passageway. Holly rushed to get into the door before it closed. Peeves noted the group, smiled, and gave them a salute, and drifted away. The three of them slipped inside. The Slytherin common room was long, with a low ceiling. It was decorated in green and silver. Round greenish-colored lamps hung from chains. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth. Several large, high-backed chairs with dark green cushions were placed facing the fire. But the three Hufflepuffs were too worried about getting caught to take in the details. "Is it really empty?" asked Becky, looking around worriedly. "Yes," assured Holly. "Over here!" shouted Myrtle. They followed her voice to the bathroom. Then Myrtle swooped out. "I'll keep the Baron busy," she announced, and left. "Whew!" whistled Mark as he surveyed the damage Peeves had wrought. Broken glass, toilet stall doors wrenched off their hinges, all sorts of tile ripped from the floor lying about. The place looked like a tornado had hit it. "Stack the tiles," commanded Holly. "Look later." She pulled off her robe and then her top sweater with the class colors. With Becky's help, she put the broken shards of mirror inside the sweater, intending to use it as a bag of sorts. Meanwhile, Mark counted out 13 unbroken tiles and placed them in 2 neat stacks. When he finished, he straightened and looked over at the other 2. "Ready?" he asked. Holly put her robe back on. Then she carefully tucked her sweater filled with mirror shards beneath the robe. "Ready," she replied. With wands extended, they used Wingardium Leviosa and floated the 2 stacks to the exit. The door opened automatically for them, and they left. Use of magic was not permitted outside in the halls at Hogwarts. All 3 stowed their wands. Mark opened his robe. He divided the tiles of 1 stack and stuck some under each arm. Becky closed Mark's robe over his arms and the tiles. Then she divided the other stack, placing the tiles under her own arms, and Holly closed over Becky's robe. Carefully, the 3 walked away from the Slytherin house entrance. They all had to walk rather stiffly, but the tiles and the mirror shards were hidden from casual observers. The 3 had just rounded a corner when Holly whispered urgently, "Hide! Someone's coming!" Mark and Becky quickly ducked behind a couch, and Holly hid behind a pillar. A moment later, 4 Slytherin students casually walked past, discussing professors and homework. When the footsteps died away, Holly announced in a whisper, "All clear," and she came out from under cover. The 3 continued slowly, ducking frequently to avoid returning Slytherin students. Holly was always able to give advance notice, even when Mark and Becky thought the way was clear. All 3 breathed a sigh of relief when they finally made it out of the dungeons. Next, they had to get past the entryway and up the stairs. A slow, steady walk enabled them to continue without generating too much notice from other students. "Hey, stop!" The shout caused the 3 to freeze in their steps. Then there was a sound of breaking glass. Holly cautiously turned around and looked. Peeves had just thrown a stink bomb at the entrance of the great hall, causing the students to scatter every which way. Taking advantage of the distraction, Becky, Mark, and Holly raced up the stairs and down the hall, stopping only when they were back inside the girls' bathroom. "I never want to do anything like that again," said Mark breathlessly as he set down the tiles. "Me neither," agreed Becky, setting down her own tiles. Holly merely nodded as she carefully pulled out the mirror shards and laid them on the floor. She pulled out her wand, pointed it, and said, "Reparo." She watched with satisfaction as the broken pieces melded together to make a seamless whole mirror. Mark helped her remove the damaged piece and slide the new one in its place. Becky cleaned off the tiles and started placing them in the empty spots on the floor. "It's not going to match," she observed as she laid down the new tiles. "Do you think Myrtle will mind?" "I don't know," answered Holly. "It was her idea, after all." She and Mark helped Becky put in all the tiles. Together they fixed tiles in place with a tile grow grout, a substance Holly had brought in earlier to secure loose tiles. A final sweeping in the bathroom was again finished. "I'm hungry," announced Mark when the job was done. "Do you think there's any food left?" "Maybe, if we hurry." The three left the bathroom in search of some food. "I think Myrtle will like it," reflected Holly out loud, thinking of the last survey she had made of the finished room as she left. The white walls gleamed, the mirrors shone, the brass fixtures shine, and, in the middle of the spotless white floor, each rimmed with a 1/4-inch sparkly silver border, were 13 Kelly green tiles. Layla came up to Holly while they were cleaning their things and potions the next day. Her curly auburn hair was tied back in a ponytail. "Did you notice," began Layla conversationally, "the Slytherin girls have been using the bathroom near the Grand Hall?" Holly thought. "No, I hadn't," she replied. She'd been too busy dodging people to notice what they were doing when they were elsewhere. The Ravenclaws were incredibly observant. "Would you know anything about that?" How would Layla know to ask her? Maybe they were just asking everyone from the other houses. "A couple of Slytherin girls got Moaning Myrtle mad yesterday," Holly replied while drying her cauldron. "Ah," said Layla, nodding with understanding. She brushed back a loose strand of curly red-brown hair and repinned it behind her barrette. "It is never a good idea to make a ghost mad."